All right, so today I want to talk about how you can use Node.js to build a website or an API and have a relational database, specifically MySQL, as the data storage for that API or website. So I'm going to be using MAMP as my way to set up and install MySQL. So we're going to walk through the installation first, setting up the project, and then get into actually using MySQL as part of the project. So MAMP is one of the options that you can use. You can install MySQL directly yourself, but then you have to do the configuration. MAMP is just a really simple way to install it and have it configured to use immediately. So when you've got MAMP, like I'm on a Mac, so it automatically redirects me to the Mac solution. And it used to be something that MAMP did was just the Mac. Now it's available for Windows or Mac. You go to the download page, you've got the old Intel-based MacBooks, you've got the newer Apple silicone ones, or Windows. So it works for either one. There's other options as well, like you can get web servers installed. WAMP, you're talking about Apache MySQL PHP on Windows. That's what the WAMP stands for. So if you use this one by AMPS, you're also going to get support for MongoDB right out of the box. XAMPP is another common one, and it's going to give you support as well for MariaDB and Perl. So lots of different options. I'm going to be using MAMP. So I have downloaded and I've installed MAMP on my computer. When you have MAMP installed, so I've skipped over the download and starting it up, but when you launch the application MAMP, you're going to have a little starting window when you start the program. There's a start and stop button, and this is going to start and stop the web server as well as the database. So MySQL is part of this. In the preferences, if you go in here, you'll see that there's ports for, like there's a general and ports section where you can set specifically, this is the port number that I want to use for MySQL. This is the port number that I want to use for the web server. So we're not going to use the web server. We're just using MySQL. We're only using MAMP here as a way to set up and configure and have MySQL running for us. So I've got this started. I've left it at the default here, the 8889. If you toggle it here, you can change port 80 for your web server and 3306, which is the default MySQL port that you'll get on most servers, but you can use the default that you get with MAMP or set it to this. Either one works. I'm using just the defaults here. Okay, so we have that up and running. The web server and MySQL are both running. Once you have MAMP installed running, you've got MAMP started, you know what the port number is, then you can actually go to the terminal and set things up. Now, the default, when you first install MAMP, we looked at the port numbers. So I'm going to open up my terminal here. I'm going to go to where this is installed. So inside my applications folder, inside the MAMP folder, there is a library, and inside that, there is a bin folder. If I list off everything inside of here, there's a lot of programs. The one that I want to use is right here, MySQL. So the MySQL program that we're going to run is here. So I'm in that folder right now, and I can just run MySQL. That's going to actually start the client for MySQL in the terminal. So I can use MySQL, the one that MAMP started up, directly from here. Now I need to provide it a username. When you've installed MAMP, the default is to have a username called root with the password root. That's what you get right out of the box. So I'm going to do that. User root, and I'm going to say, prompt me for the password. Oh, I'm pointing to the wrong folder here, so let me try that again. So I want applications /MAMP library bin MySQL. User is root. Prompt me for the password. There we go. And the password that I want to use is root. and I changed my root password. That will work for you. I've changed my root password, so I have to do that again with the actual one. There we go. So now what I'm doing is I'm running MySQL. Right here. Here's the MySQL monitor. I'm actually talking directly to MySQL from the terminal. It's kind of like running Node in the terminal. You get this prompt where you're running JavaScript right in the terminal. So what do we want to do first? Well, we're going to create a database. So by default, we can take a look. We can say, okay, show me all the databases. And anytime you're running the command here, you should end your command with a semicolon. These are the built-in ones. Music is one that I created for another tutorial. So we've got this list right here. And if we want, we can go into the MySQL one, semicolon after the command. Oh, not CD, sorry. Use MySQL is how you switch between databases. So the use command lets you switch between them. So currently we're looking at the MySQL database, and I'm going to say select star from user. There is a database, inside the MySQL database, there's a table called user. Here's the big list inside of here, and we will find inside of here, like here, root localhost. There is a user called root in here. MAMP has its own user inside of here as well. If we want to just look at the usernames, we could say select host, comma, user from user. There we go. So here's all the users right now that I have. There's 3 called root, but they have different hosts. So 127.0.0.1, ::1, and localhost. It's all the same thing. This is just IPv4, IPv6, and the domain name, localhost. They all point to the same thing, but it's 3 different ways that you could connect using a user called root. So we're going to create a new user here. And we don't need to be inside of here at all. We don't have to be in the MySQL. We're not actually editing this table. There's a command that we're going to use. We're going to say that we want to create a new database. We're going to call it media, and then we're going to create a new user for that database. So let's say we're going to create database called media. Okay, there we go. Now if I say show databases, now media is one of the ones in this list. Great. I can say use media if I want to switch over to that one. If I show tables inside of this one, there's nothing there. So we haven't created anything in there, and we don't have a user right now that we can use. So let's create a user. It doesn't matter which database I've said, like use media, use MySQL. It doesn't matter which one we're using right now. When you want to create a user, you are creating it globally with the command create user. So I'm going to create a user. I'm going to call the user alien, and it's going to be with localhost. So when I want to connect to this database, here's the username, here's the host, and then the password, we say identified by, and let's say predator. There we go. So this is my command to create the user. I have now created a user in that MySQL table. Somebody can log in with that user, but right now it doesn't have any permissions. It's just a user that's not allowed to do anything. So we want to say that this user, alien, that we just created, is allowed to talk to anything and everything inside the media table. It's allowed to create new tables, it's allowed to alter the tables, drop tables, or run the select, insert, update, and delete commands. So let's do that. We want to grant, and we're going to give all these permissions. So we'll say it can create, it can alter, it can drop, it can reference, it can select, insert, update, delete. So if you were logged in as this user, these are all the things that we want that user to be allowed to do. So on, and it's going to be the media database, the one that we just created, and then all the tables. So media.star. So any table inside media. And we're going to give this permission to the one that we just created right here, this alien at localhost. And it's important to remember that you need the quotation marks around these two separate parts. It's not one string, it's the username and the host are two separate strings. There we go. So we have created a database called media. We've created a user with the name alien, the password predator, and we've given permissions to that alien user to use anything, do anything it wants to the tables inside of the media database. We could, if we want, now exit. There we go. We're out of MySQL. We're back to the command line. And if we want to log in again, instead of the user root, hey, let's use our new alien one. Prompt me for the password. The password is going to be predator. There we go. I'm logged in. Show databases. There we go. Media. It doesn't have access to that root one, the MySQL that had the users and the other stuff. So we're going to just say, hey, I want to use the media database. Show tables. Well, there aren't any in here yet. We haven't created them, but we're allowed to do that. So we're going to create some tables. If we want to create one just very simply, let's create one called movies. So let's say create table movies, and it's going to be, let's say there's going to be a movie ID. We'll make it an integer, unsigned, make it the primary key, and auto increment. There we go. We want to have a field called movie title, and let's say release date. So movie title, let's say 128, and not null. So you have to give us a title, and then the release date. It's going to be a date field, and we'll give it default of 2001-01. Close it, semicolon. And yeah, I've made a mistake here. Syntax primary key does not have an underscore there. So where I wrote it here with an underscore, that is not correct. So let's go back. I just arrowed up there to repeat the last line that I had written. And there we go. Notes not happy about. Oh, I wrote data instead of date. Okay. So making typos is something to be avoided. There we go. So now I've created my table. If I say show tables, I've got movies, and show columns from movies. There we go. So this is what we have. Those three columns: movie ID, movie title, release date, unsigned integer, variable character, date. And we've got a default value, nulls, auto increment for the movie ID. Okay, so we're good. So we can continue to create tables and so on here, but the point of this whole thing was to be able to do this in Node, in MySQL. I'll use the MySQL in Node. So let's do that. Let's jump into VS Code. So we can leave this running. It's not going to affect anything that we do. So let's jump in here. I've created an empty project. So this empty folder, I've run npm init yes to create my package.json file. What I'm going to do inside of here is I'm going to add type and module, because I'm going to be using ES modules, not the older CommonJS for doing this. We're going to come back and we're going to do some stuff with the scripts. What I have done in here is I've created this queries.sql file. And inside of here, I've got all the SQL queries as a reference, so I can copy and paste from here as we go through it. So inside of here, we have no dependencies yet. So we do want to install some stuff. We're going to say npm, I'll zoom in here a little bit. We're going to say npm install, and we want express and MySQL 2. So those are the two dependencies that we want. Not MySQL, but MySQL 2. So we should have that. Here we go, dependencies, MySQL 2. And if I jump back to the website, here's the website for MySQL 2. So I will leave links to all these websites, all these references are going to be down in the description for you. But we're going to go through setting this up. This is the npm module for connecting to MySQL and running our SQL commands. The full reference for MySQL, I'll put that in the link as well. And we'll come back to talk about HTTP cats in a little bit. So MAMP we've already done. Jumping back into VS Code. So we have here, we've got our dependencies installed. Now what we want to do is we want to create a couple of files. We're going to create a file called index.js. That's going to be our homepage for the website. We're going to create another one called connect.js. And we're going to create another one called migrate. Now, connect is going to be the global file that we import into other files. Every time we want to connect to the database, the function to do it is going to be inside of here. And it's just a convenient place so we can include it in other files. Migrate is going to be where we do the things like this that we did already in the terminal. So creating tables, altering tables if you want to change them. So we're going to put all of that into its own file, migrate, which is going to include connect, so it can connect to the database. And this is how you manage different versions of the database. As you make changes to your table, as you go along and your API or your website gets more and more complex, you're going to want to add new tables. You're going to want to modify the existing tables, change the structure, add constraints, foreign keys, things like that. As you do that, you don't really want to have that as part of the typical code that runs every time somebody logs in. So we're going to put it into its own file, migrate. We're going to run that, and it's going to connect to the database. And we want to run this here as a script. So inside of our script section, we're going to create a command called migrate. And this one is going to say, hey, use node and run migrate.js. So every time that you want to make changes to your database, this is the command that you want to do. And we're going to have a dev one. And we'll say this is going to be node index.js. This is the script for the API, the website, the starting point. So migrate doesn't get run every time the user logs in, every time you want to get your API up and running and people using it online. This is something for the developer. Every time he makes a change to the structure of the database, you're going to run this command to do it. So that's saved. You can even think of this like the build command that you run before you actually do the dev command and actually run your API. So we've got those two commands. Now connect. We want to connect to the database. So we're going to need to bring in that MySQL 2 package. So we're going to say, I want to import MySQL from, and it is the MySQL 2 package, but promise. There is a MySQL method inside the promise section of MySQL 2. So there's two different ways you can use it. There's an old way of using MySQL 2 that had callbacks, and then the promise way where you can chain things together with .then and catch, or use try-catch blocks and callbacks. So I've imported this, and now I'm going to try to connect to my database. So we're going to start with creating a connection string. So let's say const constring is, and there's a couple of different ways that we can connect. I'm going to show you the string first, and then I'll show you the alternative after that. So MySQL is the method that we're going to be using, and then it's username password, so alien, and predator was our password, at localhost, that's the domain that we want, and then the port number. So the default for MySQL is 3306, but because of the way we have MAMP set up, this is the port number we're using. And then last of all, what's the name of the database? The one that we created is called media. So there we have it. So we're going to create a function called connect that allows us that we're going to export. So I can export it down here. We can say export connect, or you can put the export command right here. It's going to work either way. But you want to connect to the database. This is what we're going to do. And we're going to return MySQL dot create connection. And then there's a few ways that we can do this. So we can take the connection string like that. And then this is going to return the connection string, or we can chain an error onto there, an error handler. So we can say catch error. If it fails, it's up to you what you want to do here. So you can say console log. I'm going to write out what the error is, and I'm also going to return error. So by returning it here, it's going to come up, and this will return that back to whatever page is calling this connect method. So this was the first way of doing it. The second way, there is a MySQL create connection where you pass in an object and you define, hey, what's the host name? Hey, what is the username? What is the port number? Not post, but port number, 3306. And the database, what's the database name? And what's the password? So you can pass all these different parts in here and then chain the catch, then whatever you want onto the end of it. So the first way is just with a connection string where you list it all together like that. The other way is to break it apart as a connection options object where you specify each of the different pieces. Doesn't matter which one you use, both of them work, but this allows you to connect to the database. So when you call the connect method, you're going to get back a connection object that you can then use to run queries. All right, so let's set up our migrate now. We're going to import that connect method from, it's in the same folder, connect, right here. So we'll say same spot, connect.js. This is the file that we want. We're bringing in the connect function from that other file. Now, the SQL methods that we're going to call. Now, you remember I said that this is what you want to do as you're building your database, as you're making modifications to your database. I have a whole bunch of commands here. I've just copied and pasted them in. I'm not going to make you sit here and watch me type. So we're creating the table, and this is an important part here. If not exists. So the movies table, we already created it, and we even gave it a default value for date. So this has been created. We haven't created a user table, so we're going to do that. User ID, username, email, user type, defaults to guest. So it's an enumeration, two options, admin and guest for the user type. We're going to create another table called ratings, where the movie ID and user ID together make up the primary key. And then the rating, the tiny int, so 0 to 255, we're just going to use the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as the possible values. So we've got those. And then if you ever did need to make changes to tables, that's where the value of this file really comes in. Because, the create, you do that probably from the terminal at the very beginning. You've created it, or maybe you used PHP myadmin which comes with MAMP. It's a website for managing the database. So you could do that and set up the initial values like we're doing right here. But afterwards, as you make changes, you want to run additional commands. So this is the list. And if I had another command after this, I'd say, oh, okay, yeah, now SQL G. Here is the next one that I'm going to run. And you just continue to add statements, what you want to do. So I put these here as examples. So in the user table, I'm adding a hairstyle. Then I'm going to alter the name. I'm going to change it from hairstyle to hair color. And then I'm going to drop the column, hair color. So add, rename column, drop column. Those are the three commands that I'm doing with alter table. So at the end, it's going to be the exact same as the original values that we're creating. So down here, we're going to create a function. And the function is going to be running all of these SQL statements, one after the other. So I'm going to create an IFI, immediately invoked function expression. It's going to be an asynchronous function called migrate DB. There we go. And inside of here, we'll do a try catch to handle errors. So console.log failed to update database, and we'll write out what the error object itself is. So if something fails, we'll get it in the terminal here. We'll know what went wrong. And then we need to connect to the database before we can run any query. So we'll say connection is await connect. So we made this asynchronous so we could await. Connect is going to try to call this function, and it should connect to the database and return the connection object. So that's what we have here, is our connection to the database. Now, for every one of those commands up above, we're going to call query and SQL. So this is a command that we want to be able to call. So the connection object has this command inside of it. We don't have to import anything else. We're going to run the first SQL statement, and then the second, the third, the fourth, and so on. And then we'll write something out in the terminal to say, oh yeah, okay, then we've done it all. Database has been updated. So we run all of these commands, but we only do it when this migrate command gets run. So let's do that. Let's try that out. We want to do npm run migrate. And I've got an error with my rename. I'm just going to come in here and we'll just comment that one because this really doesn't matter that much for what we're doing. So let's just skip that one. Oh, we need to comment it. D. Okay. One last time. There we go. Database has been updated. Okay, so we have that and we're done. We have our file set up that we can do updates, whatever the changes are that we're making to our tables and so on. We can continue to add here. Because we're building a very simple API, there shouldn't be any more changes that we need, but we have the file and the capability to do that. All right, so connect file. Anytime we need to connect to the database, we have it. Migrate, we can do that. And we can even jump back in here. If I say show tables, so we are currently in the media, there we have it. There are the three tables. And if we say show columns from users and show columns from ratings, there we have it. And we can see that, yes, both were primary keys. So that was set up properly. Great. All right, now into our final section here, the index. This is where we're going to be setting up our actual API. So I'm going to minimize that. So we need to import express. That's going to let us build our API. We need to import our connect from our connect JavaScript file. There we are. Typical for Express, we have to call the Express function to do that. app.use express.json. So we're handling any bodies that are coming in, and we're parsing the JSON and turning it into objects that we can use. We're going to need to have a listen function. So we're going to listen on port, let's say 5001. And here's our callback function. If there's an error, console.log will write out whatever the message is for the error. Return to exit our function. But if there is no error, we want to say, hey, we're successfully listening on port 5001. Okay, so if I run now, npm run dev, there we go, listening on port 5001. So this runs. Now it's a matter of adding our endpoints. So every time you create an endpoint, we're going to have something like this. So get, what is the URL endpoint that you want? And you're going to get a request and a response object passed in by Express. With the response object, you can set a status code, and we can say, hey, I'm going to send back something. Or if you want to set headers, you can say res header, and we're going to set the content type of what we're returning. Since we're building an API, let's say application/JSON. And then we will send back a string which is written in JSON. There we go. So now, if we run this, npm run dev, so we're running node index.js. So this file is running. Now, on that port 5001, this endpoint should work. If we jump to our browser and we go, hey, I want to go to HTTP localhost, and let's say 5001. There it is. There's our endpoint. So we just have to decide for the API that we're building, what are the SQL commands that I'm going to run? What are the endpoints going to be? And that's what I've done here with the comments in this SQL file is API/movies. This is if you want to get a list of all the movies, the movie ID, title, and date about all the movies, this is the SQL statement that we'd use. If you want a specific movie, API movies, and then a number in the URL, so in the params, we'd have a param called ID. I want to get all the information about a specific movie. So that's our SQL command. The ratings. Okay, we're going to do an inner join between the movies and the ratings table, where the movie ID matches on each. We have to group it by the movie ID and movie title because I'm doing an average. We're taking an average of all the numerical values. You want to add something into movies? Well, insert into movies. Here's the two columns. We don't have to add a movie ID because that will be created for us. Here's the two values. For users, you want to add a user? These are the values you need. It will create the user ID. You want to put something in ratings? You need the movie ID, the user ID, and the rating. You want to update movies. So here's all the different ones that we could create. I'm not going to create all of these, but you could create all of these and more. So we can take this SQL statement, and it's going to be something that we pass to the MySQL object. So just like in here, in migrate, in our function, we got our connection object, and then we called query, and we passed it a SQL statement. That's all we're going to do for most of these. So this one would be passed to query. This one would be passed to the query method. and it would run that and give us back a result set. Whenever you've got a question mark, that means there's a parameter that you're passing in. And instead of using query, we're going to use the method called execute. I'm going to shut this down. There we go. So execute when we pass in the parameters. So down here, execute, because we've got values that we want to pass in, values that we want to pass in, values, values, values. Anytime you've got a question mark where there's a variable going to be passed in, you're going to use the execute method. So it would be connection.execute. You pass this in, and then it also takes an array of the values that you want to pass in. So the actual variables would go in the second. And then all of these have a callback function that you can use. All right, so let's build a couple of endpoints. So get, post, put, and delete. Those are the HTTP methods that we're using. So just like here, we're using the get method. If I wanted to do one for app.get, hey, somebody's asking for in the API /movies. For this endpoint, we've got the request object coming in, we've got a response object going back, and inside of here, we're going to be doing something similar to this. So that sort of thing. But because we're talking to the database, we really do want to wrap it inside of a try catch. So we're going to say try. Something like this. The catch part goes down at the bottom here like this. These are all going to tab over. Inside of here, there's an error object. Something has gone wrong with our query to the database. The query to the database is going to go inside of here. We do need to connect to the database. So same thing that we did here. Let's start with this. I'm just going to copy that over because we're doing pretty much the same thing. We're connecting to here. Await is complaining, so that means we need to make this into an asynchronous function. Now we've got our connection object so that we can run a query. We need the SQL. What's the SQL that we're going to run? So let's say const SQL equals, and this is just going to be SQL. The one that we want to run was the select for all the movies. This one right here. And I don't need the semicolon at the end. There we have it. So I'm going to try to connect to the database, and then I've got this SQL statement right here. Shift it over just to make it a little bit nicer. This is the command that I'm trying to run, and it's going to give me back some results. Since we're dealing with promises, we can do it one of two ways. We can use the await like this and just assign the result to a variable. So let's say const, and we're going to destructure this. I'm going to get two parts. I'm going to get result and fields. That's going to be the result of this. So when I run this query, there's no parameters here, so I use query, not execute. I'm going to get back an array that has these two things inside of it. The result is the actual data that I want to use. So we're going to have to loop through this. If we think about what we're getting here, we're saying, hey, give me all the movies that you've got in the database. So my data is going to be an object. This is what I'm going to send back. And we'll say movies. It's an empty array. Now I'm going to loop through all of those results. So result, this one right here, result.forEach, and we loop through that. We can pass each one of those things. So I can take each one of the row objects if I want, or I'm going to destructure inside of there and say, okay, these are the things that I want to get out of each row. There's something called movie ID, there's something called movie title, and there's something called release date. Those are the fields, and there we are. So for each one of those, I am going to say data.movies push, and we're going to create an object to add into that array with the things that I destructured. So movie ID, movie title, release date, not data, but date. There we are. I'm looping through all the results that I got from this query, loop through them all, extract from the row object each one of the rows, the ID, the title, the release date, and add those to this array that I created right here. Once I have that, now I can convert that into, instead of saying message success, I'm going to actually create some content. So we'll say const content equals json.stringify, and I will take my data object right here that has all the movies in it, like that, and then that's what I'm sending back. Now you can add more things in here, up to you. Whatever you want as the result, you can create as the result. You can build any string that you want as long as it's valid JSON, and then we're sending it back to the browser. If it fails, if there is an error, so if there was an error connecting, if there was an error running the query, if there was an error with one of these other commands, whatever the error is, we can write out the code here. But if you think about this, every single endpoint is going to have potentially a failure. So there's going to be a catch on each endpoint. And if you're going to do the same thing time and time and time again with every one, why not have a function that you can call? So let's say I'm going to have a function called handle error response. And this is going to be what I send back to the browser. They make a request, but something fails on my end. So what do I want to send back? Well, let's send back the response object. I'm going to need that to be able to call, send and so on. I'm going to need to have the error object. Hey, what went wrong? And maybe an HTTP code. So these three things, let's create our function here. So function handle error response, which is going to get a response object, an error object, and a code. So with those three things, so for my console, I will write out the error for myself. Now, to go back to the browser, in the response object, I'm going to set the status code to whatever number was given to me. So whatever I choose here to send, there's that. So I need to change this from a variable because there is no code defined here. I have to decide, okay, what do I want to say? Okay, if something went wrong here, well, I can make it any code that I want. Say 452, for example, is going to be my error code. I'm going to come in here. That's going to be the status that I set. And then we're going to have the header that we send back. And then we're going to say res.send. And what do I want to send back? Well, it's going to be a JSON object. And I'm just going to say error. And then our code. We need to have double quotes around this. So there's my code. And then the message, the error message is going to be, hey, why not use the error object and get its message property? There we go. That's what's going to be sent back. So every time I have a problem, I'm going to call this function. I'm going to pass in the response object, so it sends a response. I'm going to pass the error object, so those details can be written out if I want, and an HTTP status code that I pick. So why am I choosing an HTTP status code like 452? What does 452 mean? Well, if we go to the HTTP Cats website, which is a list of all the HTTP status codes, we can see that in the 400, we're talking about there's something wrong with the data, something wrong with the request, something didn't quite work out. Anything in the 500s has to do with, hey, there was a failure on the server. So I could use stuff in the 500s as well, but 400s, it's a little less severe because our code did actually run. So we are producing a result. So 400s make more sense. You know, bad request, 404, file not found, 403, you didn't have permission, the HTTP verb that you use wasn't allowed. You know, there's all these things. But I want to point out the fact that once we get up to here, 431, between 431 and 444, there is no code defined. The numbers exist, but there is no official definition of that. Then we've got a few more that are missed, then 450, 451, and between 452 and 496, there is nothing defined, which gives us the perfect opportunity to use 452 to 496 are free to use. We can decide for our application, for our API, for our website, what do those mean? So a user can say, hey, I keep getting error 452. Well, I know in my code what 452 means. And then we can just repeat this process with all the other commands. So this is get movies. So you want to insert a user. So app.post. And for the API/users. For that endpoint, the request and response, as always, we do that. I'm going to be adding a brand new user. So I come up here, I'm going to be doing the same thing as here, but I want to show the other way of doing this. Now, we can still start with this. If we're doing await, we need the async for that. Come back down here. I'm adding a new user. This is my step one. I'm going to await, so I have to have async to do this. But I often prefer to use the .then.catch chaining for my promises. For that reason, I'm going to show that way of doing this as well. So here, instead of wrapping a try catch around this, I'm going to have a new SQL statement. Doing something similar to this, I'm going to have a result that comes back that I send back. Like this is going to be part of my code, something like that. And I'm going to use connection.execute. So we're going to have a SQL command that we run. And we're going to pass in parameters. But I can say .then, like this, and then .catch. So we can use the .then.catch syntax instead of the async await. Inside of here, hey, if everything worked, this is where I'm going to put the success stuff. Down here in the catch, that is where I'm going to do this. So when I'm trying to add a new user, I'm going to do this. And if you want, you can even append this here. Instead of creating a variable, putting it inside there, and then using the variable, you do this. It returns the connection object, .execute. But if it failed, it'll go to the catch, and we still get the details. So we do need our SQL. So we are going to get our SQL command. What are we doing? We're inserting a user. So let's go over here. We'll get our post users. This is the command that we want. So we're inserting into users. That's my SQL command, like that. And there's two question marks which represent, hey, these are the values that I need. Where are those going to be coming from? And what am I going to put in here? Well, I'm going to get those values from the request object. When you're working with Express, if you've got values that are coming through the query string, if you've got values that are coming through the body, so say you've done a post and you're getting those values from the body, somebody has submitted JSON string in the body of the request to you, you can pull that data out by saying in here, okay, I've got a username and an email. So let username and email Those are the two variables that I'm going to have, that I'm going to put down in here. Username and email, those are the two things that I need. I'm going to use the default value of guest. It's just hard-coded in here. But this is going to come from request. Inside the body, there should be something called username. And for the email, request body.email. So if somebody sends us a string in the body, as part of the post request, we get something that looks like this. Username and email, something like that. We're getting this JSON string coming in. The code up at the top of the page here, this express JSON, is going to parse that. It's going to turn it from a string into an actual object and add it to the body. So here we are. This string is turned into an object with two properties, username and email. And the name of that object is body. And it's going to be added to this request object. So request body username gets us this value. Request body email gets us this value. Those two things are going to be inserted here and here by this parameter right here. Then we have success. This has worked. We've done the insert. We're going to get that same destructuring going on that we had before. So my result and my fields. Result is the data that comes back. Fields is information about the columns and so on. The result is almost always what you want, but you do have that other thing. You can console log both out if you want to take a look at them in the console to see what you're actually getting inside of there. We're getting back the result, and if you want to know, hey, what was the ID of the thing that was just created? So I can say, hey, give me the ID result.insert ID. There we go. So whatever the ID is, if you have an auto increment field, this is going to give you that value. So we take that ID, and then we don't have JSON stringified data. We don't have any data like that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to create our own JSON object here, and we'll just say it's got a message, and the message is new user ID is, and it's going to be our ID variable. There we go. So that's going to be the content. When we create a brand new user, that's what's going to go back to the browser or the client. And if it fails, there's the details. And we can use a different code for this one. So, hey, when you're inserting, that's the number that we're going to use as the status code to represent a failure to post and add a new user. And we'll do one more. Let's do app.put, hey, you want to do an update. So for the /API/movies, and we want to update which one? Hey, let's say this one. Whatever ID shows up in the URL, that's the one that we want to do. We get our request, we get our response. Inside of here, we're doing pretty much the same things we did here. We're just going to copy over most of this. We'll do it the same way. And then we'll just make modifications. So we're going to get the username and email. Oh, sorry, it's the movies. So this will be, there should be a movie title. And there should be a release date. Those are the two things that are changing. That's going to be in our JSON. We're doing, instead of that, our SQL statement for updating a movie. Do I have a put movie? Yeah, here we go. This one. So we're updating the movies table. We're setting movie title and release date to those new values where the movie ID matches some value. So let's go back into index. There's our SQL statement. There we go. We're going to connect, and then we're going to execute this SQL. we've got the title and the date are going to be the two things here, title, date. Now, there is also a movie ID. So there's going to be a movie ID, but that's not going to come from the body. It's not going to necessarily be in there. It could be in the body. You could say, hey, the movie ID, let movie ID equal rec.body.movie ID. If it is, if not, the way I've got it configured here is it's going to be actually part of the URL. So that is rec.params.id. And ID here is just whatever the person typed in the URL. That's the value. We're going to take that, and it's going to be representing this third question mark right here. So this variable goes here. This parameter is what we're reading. Doesn't matter that it's not called movie ID. So there we have our three values going in. We get the results. And instead of insert ID, because this is not an insert, what we're going to look at is we want to know, hey, how many rows were affected? And that is the property that's how you're going to know, hey, did this thing work or not? So maybe you want to take a look at this and say, you know what? No rows were affected. So maybe there was no match for that ID, but affected rows will tell you how many were done. You want to throw an error here? You could if you want. You could say, you know, if and updated we'll say is the, or affected. So if affected is 0, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw new error. So that's going to be caught down here by the catch. And you can decide, what is it that you want to say? No rows changed. Something like that. If you want to make that into an error. If you don't care that none were affected, that's fine. You don't have to do anything with that information, but this is how you can get that information. So there we go, and we can say that movie ID, this ID is going to be the variable right here, movie ID. That's the one that we want, not ID, but that was updated. There we go. And that's the result that we're going to get. And we'll get a different error code for this one. So a different HTTP status code and error code in the result going back. So you can just continue on to add, put, post, patch, delete, and get for all the endpoints. We've got examples of all the queries here. You can continue to work on that. And that's about it. That's all that it takes to connect to MySQL and have that running. So we run that. We're listening on the port. You know, there was our success for that one. And if we go to /API/movies, there is no data, but we do get the result back, movies with an empty array. And then insert, update, delete. You can play around with those ones as well. You can use Postman to test that out if you want to send sample messages, sample JSON strings like this. We can do that. Actually, I'll do that as an example. We will do a post user. We'll add a new user. Okay, so I've got Postman here. I'll bring it over. And what we want to do is build something like this going on. So where are we going? We're going to do a post to HTTP localhost 5001. That's what we want. And in the body, we want raw JSON string. It's going to look like that. That's going to be the user that we create. And that should be everything that we need. So let's send it. And we've got an error, cannot post. So API user, oh, that's what I'm missing. Just missing the rest of the URL. There we go. Try this again. Go. Sent. No error came back. Okay, so I'm going to... The error that we got here has to do with the connection object. It's not happy doing the connect and then chaining the execute on. So we will have to do that and connection. I thought it would chain through promises. Apparently it's not doing that. So connection.execute, and we'll have to change it up here for the other one as well. Doing try await connect, and then we can use the connection object. We're going to have to do the same thing right here. So async await connect, and then we can use the connection. And then for our last one down here, we'll have to do the same thing again, which is const connection equals await connect. And you should check to see that this is not an error. I'm just assuming at this point that it's not an error, which is bad practice. You shouldn't assume anything. But we'll change this. There we go. We save that. We'll restart this. Jump over to here and send. There we go. New user ID is 1. Try another one. Steve at work.org. Send. There we go. New user ID is 2. So we're able to put, as long as we do this. So add the await connect. So apparently it doesn't want to chain the promises together. That's fine. We've got the connection object. We can execute and run these queries. So queries list is here with the various endpoints listed to what they can be. So you can play around with those and see if you can create those and more. The links to all the different things, the MySQL 2 package, the documentation with all the methods inside of here. So everything that you need is inside here. They talk about prepared statements. So everything and anything that you would need that isn't already covered. The MySQL reference for any commands that you're not sure of. MAMP for downloading and setting up and configuring MySQL right at the start. And I will also add the URL for the Git repo that has all of this code. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments down below. And as always, thanks for watching.